Father Charles Strobel was a Catholic priest who seemed to flinch if you called him father, even though he held the priesthood in highest regard. He seemed to prefer the word pastor, because that's what he always wanted to be. In the 1980s, Charlie Strobel took over Holy Name, a church off Woodland Street that no one else was much interested in. What he started there grew into Room in the Inn, a citywide ministry where congregations of all kinds actually got involved, serving meals and offering indoor shelter to those who needed it. Room in the Inn grew to become a nationally recognized continuum of care for the unhoused, including an entire campus off 8th Avenue. This summer, Nashville's first permanent supportive housing facility was dedicated as Strobel House, another nod to his indelible legacy. Before Charlie died in 2023, he finally wrote a book about his life. The Kingdom of the Poor came out in September, and it got me thinking about a long interview I had saved with Charlie from 2020. Now seemed like the right time to share it with all of you. Oh, and Charlie's beloved New York Yankees are headed to the World Series for the first time in 15 years. Coincidence? Maybe not. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company.
I'm ready. Are you ready, Charlie?
Yeah, I guess.
You should know the answer.
In October of 2020, Father Charlie Strobel sat down in my little video studio downtown to talk about his life. He'd been dealing with some health problems, and friends and family thought it was time to document his memories, tell some stories, and dip into his deep well of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is about as informal as it can be on camera. So
That's John Spragens, a local attorney and friend. I'm behind one of the cameras.
But I do want you to tell me a little bit about your life story.
For those of you who didn't know Charlie, picture a Catholic priest, but in a baseball jersey, not a collar.
And so I thought we'd start way back at the beginning, in 1943.
His face is still boyish, and today he's in a navy blue sweatshirt, jeans, and tennis shoes. And if you're not a regular reader of the Bible, it wouldn't have mattered to him. But you might want to skim just 3 chapters, Matthew 5, 6, and 7.
And my first year at St. Mary's, Kentucky, the professor who taught Greek there for 50 years told us that he read the Sermon on the Mount every day of his life. And I said, "What's the Sermon on the Mount?" The Sermon on the Mount is a presentation of the early church's teachings as they understood them coming from Jesus. It's almost like a catechism, a book of instruction. And some say it's an impossible ideal, but it's not meant to be an impossible ideal. Teachings like, if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn and offer him your other. You have teachings about loving your enemy, do good to those who persecute you. You have teachings about what to do with money. Capitalism says I have the right to private property. But what the Sermon on the Mount is saying, in effect, is that I have a right to private property until you have need of it. How do you pray? They're all personal invitations to live a blessed life. And to me, when I read them for the first time, I thought, this is something that is more than an impossible ideal. This is an expression of a love of a disciple. It's really talking about loving in a way that doesn't allow you to walk away.
Charles Strobel was born in Nashville in 1943. He was the third of 4 children and grew up on 7th Avenue North in Germantown. A hardscrabble life, full of characters and strong community.
1940 to 50, there was a lot of situations in which the poor worked for the poor. There were men who drove horse-drawn wagons, selling vegetables off the back, or selling ice for the ice boxes. There was no refrigeration, or selling coal for the furnaces. And then there was another man who drove a horse-drawn wagon, and he came by and picked up the garbage, the food garbage. We burned the trash and we hung the food garbage on a pole high enough that the rats couldn't get to him. And he was known as the slop man. He lived on the fringe of the city, had a bunch of hogs, and he collected and fed the hogs with our slop. There was a woman who took in washing. Nobody had washing machines except Miss Poole, and she picked up our laundry and did the laundry. She picked it up on Monday and brought it back on Thursday. So it was an unusual time. It was right after the war, and the healing of the war was going on, but I didn't know much about any of that. If anything, I probably joined in playing Army with Jack Link, who was my best friend who lived up the street. And at the time, we rode bicycles around and pretending we were fighter bombers. Where the Bicentennial Mall is, there was a camp, a bunch of bushes and weeds, and it was called the jungle. And there were street alcoholics that slept there and gathered there. And when they were asleep, Jack and I decided we would be fighter bombers and took cherry bombs and rode through the camp throwing these bombs into the fire, which upset the whole campsite. And then we did that several times, and then I say after a few times, even a 12-year-old can develop a conscience. And we looked at each other and said, this isn't fun anymore, and we stopped doing it. But they never got upset with us. In fact, we kind of weaseled our way into the camps, and they would tell us stories about being who they were. Stories of grief and love and anguish and guilt. And we sat around and they treated us like we were their sons or their little brothers. And I think that as the history of the Room in the Inn developed and we created the guest house for the publicly intoxicated, I think that was created maybe out of the experience of with those fellows, Clayton Massey and his band of brothers. They took us in first, And it was, I think, my way of repaying them, not knowing it, but it seems to be logical that the guest house is formed out of that experience of childhood.
Another foundational lesson came from Charlie's high school history teacher, a priest named Jim Zralik.
Yeah, Jim was the pastor at Holy Name. He was a priest, pastor at Holy Name, and he also taught history at Father Ryan. And in addition to that, he has had an operation that we called the Sugar Shack. And it was down right at the railroad overpass on Charlotte, right down from the Capitol. It was just an old brick building, and he had it serviceable because he knew enough, being at a Holy Name, he knew enough people, men who were street alcoholics, as we said, called them then, winos and bums. And so what he did, he created the Sugar Shack as a place to have old refrigerators and stoves and washing machines all worked on, so that poor people could come in and buy a refrigerator that had been worked on by these men who were street alcoholics. Now, they didn't know what they were doing most of the time, and so they would try to sell these things, and when the customer got it home and plugged it in, it wouldn't work, so they kept bringing them back, and it was a money-losing proposition. Well, Jim wasn't about selling refrigerators and repairing stoves. He was about restoring people's vibrant life of love and goodness. And that was his way to get fellows in there, and he would only have about half a dozen to a dozen at any one time. But his way of getting them in there was to say, come on, you can do this. And of course they would say they could, because they didn't want to not please him. But they never repaired a successful stove or refrigerator. And I know he paid for whatever expenses that he had out of his own pocket. Well, I lived in North Nashville, and what would happen is that if he saw me in the afternoon after school as he's driving across town, he would make a stop there at the Sugar Shack. And of course, he also would want to expose us to the work that he's doing and try to convert us into helping him. I would drive over there with him. He always ended by giving me something to do. And instead of just hanging around, he would always give me something to do. And I thought, why does he do that? I think, I'm okay without having to do anything because I'm lazy. But I think it was his teaching methodology that if somebody needs to understand a problem, they need to be in the middle of fixing it.
You're listening to a special episode of Banner & Company, featuring an interview with the late Father Charlie Strobel, recorded in October of 2020. We'll be right back.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. Yeah, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Charlie seemed to know sooner than all of us what he wanted to do with his life.
Probably 3rd grade. I remember being really inspired, is a big word for a 3rd grader. But I remember wanting to be a priest for the first time, thinking about it, about 3rd grade. The priest was at the front of the congregation, leading the people in prayer. And it seemed to me that that was important over everything else. And I don't know how that sounds, but I think that's where it all starts. Not in feeding the hungry, but in leading people to holiness. It is a powerful role that you play in the lives of people who want you to lead them and comfort them and forgive them. And as a priest, you don't feel like you really are worthy, and you don't feel like you do that in an adequate, in a healing way. You hope you do. Then I got to 8th grade, and I had never mentioned any of it to anybody, to Mom or to any friend. Sister Mary David was the principal at the school, 8th grade principal. And one day she stopped me and said, Charles, have you ever thought about being a priest? And I felt like I was kind of embarrassed that I couldn't hide it. She saw something for me to do. And I said, yes. And she said, well, just pray and go on to Father Ryan and make the most of your school years there. And maybe that's something you could do. Well, I remember leaving and going home and thinking, golly, she really thinks I could do it, because I wasn't sure I could. And so I went to Father Ryan, and I didn't mention it to anybody. I know she did, to Father Tom Lynch, who taught there. And I didn't want to mention it to anybody, because then you are stamped with the do not bother, do not interfere, and they spread the word with the girls at St. Bernardine Cathedral. And so I thought, this is not fun. But anyway, I got through it, and Father Tom Lynch encouraged me to go to the seminary more than anyone, in that he kept bird dogging me. Well, the bishop at the time was sending all of his seminarian candidates to St. Mary's in Kentucky. That was 1961 to 1965, 4 years. I was there in a rural county. You lived in community like a monk. You weren't involved in any kind of pastoral work. You were out there to learn your theology and your philosophy. And that was, it was as if God's in his heaven and all is right with the world. The tragic killing, assassination of Kennedy was what disrupted the whole world of training. So when I graduated, I went to St. Mary's, Baltimore, which was an urban seminary. And I just didn't quite fit the way I thought I would. And I transferred to Catholic University. And that was the only place I felt like I really would find contentment, I guess. And if you could ask me, what 4 or 5 years would you like to be in Washington, D.C. in the last 100 years? I would have said, and would say, from those years, and I was lucky enough to be a part of that. It was life-changing. I grew up in a household that was conservative in its religious practices, and it worked for us. So when I got to Catholic University, the curriculum was liberal as it related to interfaith relations, race and prejudice, and as it related to poverty. And the church was encouraged to be involved in all of those issues of social justice. So we were in the middle of the protests.
Washington, and a giant demonstration against the Vietnam War by more than 20,000 protesters.
All of those demonstrations came out of our understanding at Catholic University of the issues of justice. One of the professors, Charlie Curran, a priest who taught birth control, he got in trouble because of his teachings, and the chancellor of the university, a cardinal, refused to renew his contract. And our class, or our house of studies, protested that. All of us struck the university. So we go down and we see Walter Cronkite that evening after we went on strike.
From CBS News headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
And he said, as he was tonight, for the first time in American education, a group of students have shut down a university. And we looked at each other and we said, we've done something nobody else has done. And we did go on strike. And the cardinal had to relinquish his position and restore Father Curran to his place. That was exciting, but it also put our seminarians from Tennessee on notice that if we could cause any really outburst of problems of any kind, we were kicked out.
After teaching school in Knoxville and pretty much hating it, Charlie eventually got the opportunity to come home.
They said, who can we get to go to Holy Name? Who would want to go? They said, well, Charlie will go. And so they asked me if I would go, and I said, yeah, I'll go yesterday. It had all the conditions of justice that were still being denied, and mainly because of the poor that lived in the area. And I remember the first thing I did was go to the Planning Commission and say, give me a profile of the parish, the population, and the average income for that at that time, this is 1975, the average income was $12,000. But when I asked the bishop, what do you want me to do, Bishop? And he said, well, I don't care, just close it if you want. And I thought, boy, that's freeing. I can do anything, do whatever you want. I was excited that I could go to this place and start whatever I was going to do without a lot of oversight. As long as I kept him financially solvent. The first Sunday I remember saying to them, to the parishioners, there have been 8 pastors in the last 12 years. There's not a lot of stability, as I see it, based on just that evidence. So we're going to stay here, and I have no reason to want to go anywhere else. And I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to meeting you and getting to know all of you. We had a wonderful secretary, administrator, administrative assistant, cook, bookkeeper named Mary Hopwood. And I said to her one day, Ms. Hopwood, all we do is give out peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And she said, well, that's the way it is here, that people are hungry. And I said, I know, I'm not objecting to it, I just wonder if we could do more. And she said, well, I don't know. I don't know how you do it. And Father Bevington at St. Henry's knew a woman, Margaret Don, who wanted to do a soup kitchen. And she came from Washington, D.C. And he sent her over to me, and she said, I'd like to do a soup kitchen. And I said, well, great, you can start yesterday. She built up the loaves and fishes, which started in 1983. And so now we're getting close to the beginning of Room in the Inn, because the people now are starting to come onto the property for food during the week at lunchtime, but they were going out to the places to sleep outdoors, and there was not any outreach of any kind of shelter other than the Salvation Army and the Union Mission. That night in 1985, the weather was not very good. On the east side of the river where LP Field is, they had all kinds of shanties and cardboard boxes for dwellings, and they living on the river. So I just didn't know what else to do, but went downstairs one night when they were sleeping in their cars and invited them in to spend the night. Now, I paused a moment before I did that, because I knew that it would mean you couldn't just do it one night and then go away. And I thought, if I do this, I may end up doing it for the rest of my life. And then I thought, like Scarlett O'Hara, I'll think about it in the morning.
If it truly does take a village to raise a child, Nashville was the village that gave us Charlie Strobel. The laundry lady and the slop man. Riding bikes with Jack Link through the jungle. Jim Zralick's Sugar Shack. Sister Mary David. Have you ever thought about being a priest? The student strike at Catholic University. And a bishop who said, do whatever you want at Holy Name. Mary Hopwood and Barbara Dunn said, why not a soup kitchen? We'll conclude with Charlie himself in a promotional ad for Room in the Inn. Nobody says it better.
Well, over the past 36 years, I've used many images to explain the importance of Room in the Inn. I've described the program as a sanctuary from the violence of the streets, or as Ellis Island for urban refugees, or a Red Cross tent in a war zone, or as an oasis in an asphalt desert, or a gathering of friends, or as a rewriting of the original No Room in the Inn story. After 36 years, the most important image I use now is the notion of a communion meal. Consider all the ways we eat a meal, often on the run. 12 people sitting individually at a McDonald's, they're eating a meal, but something is missing. The gathering of the 12 people in a Room in the Inn congregation also experience a meal, to be sure, but even more. It's not just a meal, but a communion meal. A communion meal is a meal that has sharing and intimacy. It reaches the depths of the soul and the heights of mystery. It is called sacred by people of religion. Unlike God, however, no one ever has to doubt or try to prove its existence. A communion meal is experienced the way we experience the sunsets and the mountaintops. For 36 years, homeless and housed individuals have gathered to sit down and share such a meal. It has been a powerful element of grace and hospitality that has transformed thousands of lives. Regardless of the food, the chili, the lasagna, the salad, the corn, the drink, a Room in the Inn supper carries the force of the unleavened bread and unblemished lamb and choicest wine that were shared at those ancient Passover suppers and the Last Supper. Ultimately, such a meal contains the possibility of a communion with the God who is among us. For 36 years, people have come together to do this, reluctantly at first, for suspicions were plenty. Some congregation members stood on the other side of a serving counter, like vending machines, dispensing food without sharing, while the homeless guests wanted to go off and eat in a corner by themselves. But the invitation of God to come, sit down, and eat together eventually won the hearts of all, and the miracle of a communion meal was born. Now, 36 years later, I believe it remains our most important connection. Room in the Inn may be safe and clean and warm and dependable and secure, but most importantly, it is loving hospitality, found in the sharing, the laughter, the tears, the memories, the hopes, and all those other moments that bring us communion with each other and with God.
Banner & Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Haruch and Andrea Tudhope. Original music by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company.